So that's the power move, is to get Starlink before you go on vacation.
I've done it before. I've rented satellite phones and things like that.
Oh my God, you rented a satellite phone?
Yeah.
What are you, like James Bond?
No, I just have to stay connected.
Seriously? Come
Yeah.
on.
It was a satellite modem. This is before Starlink.
Is it like a little briefcase?
No, it's like a little thing, a little puck.
Oh, well, that's less exciting. Welcome to People vs. Algorithms, a show about media, technology, and culture. I am Brian Marcy. I am doing this from Paris. Troy is going to be doing this from London, and AB is doing this from an undisclosed location. We've got some Wi-Fi issues. We talk a lot about things that Europe is great at. Wi-Fi is not one of them, but they're great at a lot of other things. And Alex was unable to join this week. We're not icing him out. It was just my own fault with scheduling and travel, and time zones still confuse me. Anyway, we get right into it and we talk about Substack to kick things off. And then we get into what we learned from Cannes and the New York City mayoral race and all kinds of other things. All right, let's do this. Troy will come in.
Yeah.
AB, I want to talk to you about some M&A stuff. Breaker, which is an interesting media newsletter publication, said Lachlan Cartwright and Ravi Samaya write it. So it's good. I like it. It's like very gossipy too. But anyway, they had something in it in today's about the M&A market for a lot of these like smaller media publications. And I thought it was interesting in that we've just spoken about this before, but it's really hard to see the enterprise value in a lot of the most successful of these properties.
Yeah, I mean, so the reference is a couple Substacks, and I think the interesting thing with really good Substacks and these like parasympathetic relationships that develop between the writer and the audience is that the better your Substack is, the harder it could be to potentially sell, because in media, there's been personality-driven brands, especially like in cooking, or consumers attach a lot of trust to having a person making the food versus a brand. But for the Substack writers, it's tough because if they want to sell in the future, they have to sell the brand and themselves. And so I think there's a few breakout people that can command a pretty significant value, but they're going to be stuck effectively doing the same thing after the sale. They're not going to be able to detach themselves from the day-to-day of the business. Yeah.
Troy, how do you see this? And how does some of these, like, I mean, I understand like with Call Her Daddy, it's like very, you can build a network. But I think, a lot of this, to me, it's reminiscent of, what Bill Simmons did. I mean, he used his personality in order to build something bigger with a lot of enterprise value. I think these days it's a little bit different, but how would you counsel those who have success as like an individual independent media brand, but want to build something with real enterprise value?
I mean, the first thing is probably to build a subscription base, because that's more resilient than anything else. And I think that you have to have a brand next to the individual that can carry some of the water, so that you can put other people underneath of it and you can insulate it from just key man risk. So, I think Blake makes a great point that there's people that are wildly successful on Substack because it's an extension of themselves, even though some of them, manage the way they're sort of manifested inside of their media product. I think Emily Sundberg does that pretty well. So it's a little bit of Emily, but it's much more than that. But I think these are, if you're doing M&A for a media company, these are hard decisions to make because for the obvious reasons that the talent can leave.
I mean, the problem with the commentary on the space, most of these writers are lazy, right? So that's why they just keep referencing Emily over and over, but not saying that she's good or bad. But the point is, there's a lot of different types of Substacks. When you reference Bill Simmons and Call Her Daddy, it's a much different content format. It's very episodic. So the amount of work that Alex does versus Emily is completely different, right? Emily's writing every day. Alex is recording a podcast or two every week. And I think where there's interesting Substacks are more when it's catering to a different, like an audience that is B2B, or we've talked about this before, Brian, where you can have additional products and services created, either funded with advertising, subscription, blah, 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 where that's where real enterprise value can be created. And I think what's nice is a lot of these Substackers are being smart about how they're growing their businesses. So they might have a couple million of revenue and it's effectively profit because they're not really hiring anybody else. And they can use that money to sort of test and learn their way into products and services that their audience likes and that will buy. And that's like the value in having a stronger relationship with the audience. It's because you can ask them what they want and they'll tell you.
Yeah, I mean, that was the example of, I'll just say it's in a very B2B niche newsletter that is making way more money than a lot of the Substackers that you end up hearing a lot about, because those are like journalists. And like what I've always noticed is the bar is extremely low for journalists when it comes to these things. And that's why I think many of them don't build really big businesses, because the questions that I always get about independent is, can you make a living? And like people who come from different spaces are like, I'm gonna make a lot of money, you know? And whereas I think journalists, and just because of the nature of the profession, end up having lower expectations, because these models, if you hit it, can have a ton of leverage in it.
100%. And the problem with a lot of the commentary right now is the people covering the space are coming at it from the perspective of, oh, that would be a cool job or business to have, not thinking about, is this Substacker really growing a real business, right? So a lot of the top Substackers, not in the B2B segment you're talking about, but just in general, are getting coverage because of like these unique, 1 to 4 million of revenue per year, blah, blah, blah. And that's really interesting to the writer covering it, but that's not a real business yet.
Right. Substack is raising money. I don't know if you saw this. Eric Newcomber, who also has a Substack, reported on Substack, which is, perfect. And not a ton of details about what they're going to raise and whether they're going to get to that very frothy valuation that they had previously. I think that was 2021. They tried to raise, another time and basically then like sort of threw in the towel, did a little crowdfunding. They're very hot right now. I feel like Derek Thompson just left The Atlantic for Substack, and they've become synonymous with this space, right? And with the idea of independent media. And I think that's incredibly powerful. At the same time, as a business, considering that they have, knocked the cover off the ball on the brand side and the positioning side, it doesn't seem like it's an amazing business.
Yeah, I mean, you have, I think, two talented operators who've created an environment that their riders love. Where they need to fix the business is actually generate revenue that's detached from taking a toll on the subscription, and have an additional lever or two where they can basically create additional value for themselves. It's not purely this 10 to 15% based on subscription fees, and more so on advertising, performance marketing, things like that. And the second thing is a lot of their products just kind of suck. Like the app isn't that great. The feed isn't that great. And so I think that, look, they have Andreessen, I think, in the cap table, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, when you have a top decile investor, the inability to raise your next round is not a signal of like, do you have the right connections and things like that? Because when you have an investor like that who sits on your board, who's in the cap table, they should be your biggest cheerleader, because their value is tied to the company raising more money and continuing to grow. And so I think, and I don't know, I'm speaking purely as a layperson sitting on the sideline, but I think one of the things that that's like a really interesting tell based on their inability to fundraise is people are looking at the metrics. They're looking at, because Substack has tried to push people over to the app. It's not worked. And everyone's
Wait, explain that. Why do you say it hasn't worked?
If you ask most Substackers the percentage of their audience that's reading and consuming their content on the app, it's like 1%. The app crashes. Like, how is that possible? That's like the power of having Andreessen and like, they should be getting, besides like this whole AI world, if an engineer wants to work in media, like if I was them, I would just go steal the New York Tech Times engineering team. I would just walk there and and hire 5 of their engineers who built the apps there. Like, it's so simple. And so as someone sitting on the sideline, I think the tell with their inability to fundraise is significant questions around future revenue and their inability to have a product that consumers like.
Yeah. Well, the New York Times Tech Guild, if you remember, they had a little bit of a labor action. They were very upset about some of the fragrances in the break room, so they would have to.
Yeah, they don't like to come to work when it's hot. So look, I hope they can raise this money. I think that with more money, they can fix a lot of these. I'm just pointing them out because I think it's so easy to fix. They have what you need to succeed, which is they have all the best talent. They have a platform that doesn't charge that much. It doesn't make sense for you to leave the platform. So a lot of things are aligned. They just have to execute. And I think there's a bunch of questions around their execution.
I would agree on that. Troy, do you see, because I think one of the questions I have about Substack is, what it really wants to be, because I've taken some shots at them. I actually left Substack, mostly because it was terrible at email. I think it's kind of hilarious that they're synonymous with email and they're terrible at it. They don't have basic functionality that any email service provider has. You can't do a welcome sequence. You can't do any kind of audience segmentation. I mean, it's the sort of bottom of the barrel when it comes to email, which is technically what they're about, at least what they started.
But the number one thing you want in an ESP is deliverability, and I think they have the best, right? So I agree that they don't have all these features that you want and that you need when you're growing a newsletter, but I think they've succeeded on the deliverability side.
Well, what is your question, Brian?
Well, I guess my question ends up being, I think we're kind of going post-text in some way. I don't know if you remember a few years back what Felix...
I think that's the
Felix
issue.
Salmon said he was going post-text.
Right. Substack is doing a good job with text. I think Substack is becoming, or has become, or it's on its way to becoming the sort of YouTube of text newsletters. And I think that to do that, you have to make an effort to get the best voices on your platform. But having said all that, they have $45 million of revenue at a 10% take rate roughly. So there's a kind of a $500 million GMV inside of Substack, which is far and away the most popular application for, disseminating newsletters. If it grew, if the size of their sort of effective GMP doubled, it'd be a $100 million business. When they're raising at $700 million, we're still talking about, a really sizable, and I'm assuming they're losing money right now. So it's a sizable revenue multiple. You'd be betting on the company's ability to drive some type of platform economics, which usually means when you get to a certain scale that you don't have to continue to increase the size of your product and tech team and all the operational stuff that goes around that. So you can drive 20, 30, 40% margin and you're, with a really stable business. One of the challenges I think for them is anybody can walk away at any time. There's lots of alternatives. You can go to Ghost, you can go to Beehive, you can take your list and, kind of run your business elsewhere. Unlike YouTube, where, the economics of the platform and the scale of the platform make it difficult to leave. So, I think it's the jury's out in my mind as to whether it's ever going to be a good business. And clearly they have to get beyond subscriptions to find another revenue stream that's going to really make it a good business. So they have to find, their way to audio, their way to video, and they have to be part of that advertising revenue stream to really sort of make the business exciting, I think.
Yeah, I think that's it right there, right? They have to get beyond subscriptions. Supposedly, either Chris and or Hamish were at Cannes. I can't say I saw them there, but you don't go to Cannes if you're not ready to do advertising and claim that it's something other than advertising. This is the way tech companies operate. They always say, no, we're never running advertising, and then they run advertising. They have to get beyond subscriptions. The business will just be too small. There's only so many subscriptions to go around.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fundamental principle of media is that consumers misjudge how much they pay for content and how much they're willing to pay. You look at any other valuable media channel, and there's a combination of advertising. Most things are ad supported. There's very few things like HBO that was a pure subscription play, but most businesses need advertising and the revenue weighting. And the interesting thing, super basics, is like the reason why you can take a higher take rate on advertising sales versus subscription is advertising requires a little bit more hand-to-hand relationships, all these things. And so that's where Substack can easily charge 30 or 50%, like what YouTube does now.
Exactly. I mean, I spent a week in Cannes. Let me tell you, it's hard work. This ad business is very difficult work. You have to go to endless cocktail parties. There are fancy dinners. I scandalized a bunch of people at Baoli. I mean, this is difficult labor. It's not like subscriptions. Anyway, on Cannes, since neither of you were there, if there is an apocalypse coming with AI, you wouldn't know it being there, honestly. And the parties are still happening. Neil Vogel, friend of the pod, he filled in for Troy. I don't think we didn't have anyone filling in for you, AB. Sarah Fisher was filling in for Alex Schleifer. And, Neil, gave me the relax, you're too negative, it's all going to be fine. I don't know if you heard it at all, Troy, but, Neil's good at this. And are you buying what he's selling?
I find Neil to be an important voice in the industry. And I think that he brings a kind of grown-up perspective. Obviously, he's talking his book. He's the CEO of a company, which it's important to point out that basically the market assigns no value to his company.
And they make a lot of money.
Not unlike Ziff Davis, who also makes a lot of money. The market doesn't like the prospect of a company that's largely text-based, largely about, traditional media brands and, has some type of platform dependency. So they hate it. And you can see that in Ziff's multiple, and you can see it in Neil's buried inside of the IAC public shell, but he's, the market doesn't like what he's doing. So, and the truth is he has a lot of health content, a lot of food content, a lot of lifestyle content, a lot of evergreen content, which he talks about proudly. He doesn't do politics, doesn't do news, et cetera. But he's really good. I think they're really good at running that type of business. And his message to everyone was, stop crying and figure out how, what the next revenue playbook is for all of your brands. It might be events. It might be some type of affiliate. It might be a subscription. It's the same thing. I think it is all fine. It's fine, except that, his company has zero enterprise value.
Okay, well, that's a positive view.
His one provocative line, and I noticed he used it in the podcast. Yes, I did listen to it, Brian.
I'm glad.
Was that there's one Google and there needs to be one publisher, and I want to be that publisher.
So they're going to be one. I think this is a return because I actually name checked Brian Goldberg, and I sort of took a little swipe. Like I said, oh, well, this is the idea that Brian Goldberg was talking about mass consolidation, and I think Brian thought he would do it. And then I looked up, and who was there wearing a fedora? But Brian Goldberg. It's a little awkward. I didn't know he was actually there. But yeah, I think that is the sort of return of this idea of, look, put these businesses together. Because I think one of the other big takeaways I had in Cannes, and Neil had talked about this, is, publishers just do not have any leverage when it comes to any of these quote unquote negotiations with these AI engines. I mean, they're basically just going to take what's given to them. Right? There's just not a lot of leverage, and finding that leverage is going to be really difficult. Now, I don't know if Dotdash Meredith has the playbook that would allow it to swallow up a bunch of other properties, but who knows? Maybe can scale provide that kind of leverage? What do you think, AB?
Yeah, I think it's tough to assume that there's going to be one publisher, and I don't actually know if it would ever afford you the right leverage that he's seeking, because the trade is, if you're going to have leverage to ask someone for money, they have to be making enough money from that consumer to give you, right? And the money that these AI engines are making by ripping the content from all these websites, I don't think is enough there to actually give value back to the publishers at the same level to actually have real businesses. So I think it's tough. On your point about why the music's still playing, it makes that Neil is the executive of one of the largest publishers, and everyone in the industry, it doesn't make sense, especially when you're in front of a lot of your customers, to say the sky is falling, right? So
no, I don't mean with that. I just mean in general, across the entire swath of this industry.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's just important to take a minute and sort of say, what would leverage look like? What is leverage? And in this situation, either an individual company creates content that the aggregator needs, or that a group of companies can work together to prevent them from getting the content of the collective. And I would say two things on that. One is, just today there was a ruling that basically, I think it's early, but said that Anthropic's use of content, largely from books, is fair use, because the judge ruled that their sort of use case was transforming that content, and therefore they're protected by the fair use doctrine. So that's not a good early sign. I think the war is, a long way from being over. The second is that, to me, the content that probably has the most leverage is heavily reported up to the minute news. That's the stuff that eventually you'll want to either subscribe to directly, or you'll seek out directly as a consumer. Or if the aggregator, the AI aggregator, is going to provide that, you're going to have an expectation that it has good, up to the minute, well reported information, which to me is expensive to gather, requires humans, is always changing, and has some leverage.
This was the point that Meredith Levian made during a live recording of the Mixed Signals podcast. There was a question that talked about their training data, and she was like, "You mean our journalistic IP?" She didn't like the idea.
I love that point. And I
because it is true
Meredith,
that the language does commoditize things. Everything just becomes data. And the New York Times struck that Amazon deal. I think, look, litigation is a form of negotiation, and I think they had to prove that this isn't some sort of ideological thing, that they're willing to have a fair value exchange. One of the things that she said that struck me, and maybe I'm reading too much into it.
She was a total pro on that podcast.
Meredith is a complete pro and has always been a pro. Earlier in her career, I remember she used to speak at Digiday events. And this is way back in Forbes. And I would offer people to do a run through before they went on stage, the day before. Not one person ever showed up. She showed up, and she was always very prepared and did an amazing job. A lot of the male executives would show up hungover and be like, "I haven't seen this thing before." Anyway, total pro. But she said that she wanted, beyond the money, it was about control over it. And I think that's the part I'm like, oh, you're not going to get much control over how your content is used by these AI engines.
Look, if an AI engine wants access to breaking news, they'll just go do a deal with AP and be done with it. And I think that the training stuff, the problem with as these models get better, the amount of training data that needs to be fed into them, they've effectively, in some instances, run out of data to feed. And so there's new training methodology where the model actually makes new stuff. It's basically just feeding itself things that it creates, right? Because the power of these models and the amount of training cycles and things like that they have to do now, they've basically run out of human written content.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that came out in Cannes on this was Matthew Prince was there, and he gave a version of a speech he gave at our dinner, actually, from December, Troy. He's the Cloudflare CEO. And Cloudflare has emerged a little bit as a possible white knight. I mean, publishers love to look for someone that will come and save them. And as a CDN, at least the way I understand it, they could actually block the bots. And the idea that he's been floating and that will take place, I guess, at some point this summer is the publishing's version of Liberation Day, in which basically, bots will be turned off by default. And then, publishers will have control over which bots get through to their pages. So interesting one. I don't know. Do you know much about what Cloudflare is trying, Troy?
I don't. I do think that, unlike ever before, we are now looking at an internet that is half human, half bot. And advancements in, agents is just going to mean that you're surrounded by fake people on the internet. And it always used to be a small part of the traffic that you saw on your website that you would attribute to bots, and it was a rounding error, and you could deliver ads against it and get away with it. I think it's just going to get much more problematic for anyone that's doing any ad serving. The new challenge of visibility or viewability rather, is really about whether it's human viewability or not. And I think there's going to need to be some kind of, toll booth to manage, bot traffic, whether or not, the reason that we weren't more aggressive about this in the past is because usually bot sniffing went hand in hand with distribution. So you let Google in and you let others in because they indexed your property and you were visible on search properties. But here it's I think it's whether or not it's a business like for people like Tollbit, I'm not sure, but managing access, of non-human entities and then ultimately building a marketplace around that, even if the tolls are very small, I think will be important.
Yeah, a lot of people want to get to the marketplace and it's not there yet. But I think, Cloudflare is interesting just because of they are a choke point at the end of the day for traffic. One other thing that came up that I thought was pretty interesting, this is a good prediction, was Amazon eventually buying Dotdash Meredith, actually. That we would see something like that where a publisher goes up, that they get taken off as a front for
retail
products.
media.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. I mean, Amazon has a really good problem to have, right? 50 billion of retail media dollars. 49 of it is spent on the platform. I think you see an opportunity for Amazon or even Walmart to want to acquire a media company if they can sort of continue on this first party data path and really know who's looking at the content and then serve them up the most relevant ads to then lead back to a purchase. I think so I've been pretty negative on this tolling, but there's actually I think I've changed my mind.
Oh.
Which is, so the way to think about tolling is actually a little, as you describe how Cloudflare wants to do it, is instead of trying to go to OpenAI and do a deal, if you have a ring fence around a publishing property and you effectively charged a toll for a bot, I think that's a different relationship, right? And to Troy's point, there's certain types of content that will have higher value versus others. And so you could see in a future where to let OpenAI come and pull data for a certain query, you could charge something that, because at that point then the consumer is paying OpenAI for access to information. So you can almost see it like where Apple has the Apple News subscription, where with OpenAI, you have a separate tier to where, like right now, OpenAI just turned on connectivity for the chat component to your Google Drive, but you could see them easily add on another content tier where you're basically paying $10 to $20 a month, which then allows it to scrape all that information in the chats, right? And so then that starts to make a lot more sense to me.
Yeah. One of the other things I was struck by at Cannes in my discussions is that publishers just, I don't want to say they've given up on, but they're not very excited by the mechanized ad systems at all, right? They just want to talk about events. They want to talk about anything other than putting ads on web pages. I know that that's probably a somewhat obvious point for this podcast, but you definitely feel it there. Brian Goldberg wants to come back on this podcast and talk about how he's turned around Bustle with his event strategy. Very different. I'd love to have Brian back. He's great to talk to.
It might be a little bit early for his sort of
George
I know,
Bush but like still, come on, give the guy.
Yeah, but Brian, I want to ask you a different question related to something you said in our text chat, which is essentially about a post-text media environment.
Oh yeah.
And I'm interested in that. I understand why there's pressure on the text world from an advertising perspective, but how do you see it from a consumption point of view? Like, do kids just not read anymore? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean,
I just think the other alternatives of media are super addicting, right? So even though you can get fulfillment from reading text, you can go down a rabbit hole so much easier with these algorithm-driven consumption, or like effectively it's like a feed trough, right? And so even though you might like to read Substacks and things like that, if you open your YouTube app and you're watching shorts, like you can consume an hour or two without even thinking. and it's just pure dopamine hits.
Yeah, I mean, they've changed to like the SATs, like for reading comprehension, because people can't read for more than 150 words. I mean, I think it's like absolutely true. But I think the biggest thing is like, did you see this, the OpenAI, this latest lawsuit, which it's being sued by another IO, which was building an AI device. And we haven't had this AI device, but I think the direction where it's going, whether OpenAI is going to work with Johnny Ive on this and come out with this or not, I don't know. Whether it's going to be a puck, it's not going to be a phone with a screen. You know, it's very obvious that the culture is moving away from being in front of a screen at like all times. And I think reading is very, that's why I think audio is a very interesting space, particularly. I mean, I was talking with one, I'll just say a tech person at a publisher, and they're completely into audio as the successor to the web page, that ultimately AI is going to manifest itself, particularly when it comes to content, with audio. And when it becomes a very ingrained habit, and Alex is our early adopter, even though he's not here, and he is, you know, completely audio first and has no time for words. You know, I think that's noteworthy. And I think, you know, getting outside of text is very important pretty much for anyone in media right now.
Yeah. The way I read that, Brian, I agree with what you're saying. I personally find text, you know, rewarding and efficient. I mean, I like it, but I guess I grew up on it. But what I took from the OpenAI announcement of some newfangled device that wasn't going to try to replace your phone is the best way to approach innovation is to layer on top of what we already do, as opposed to try to replace a completely entrenched incumbent that has all the network effects of incumbency. So why try to make a better phone that Apple's been working on for, 20 years? Come up with something just like, we still play records, but you can also have digital music. Like, media is layers. And so come up with something that's additive without challenging, an existing player for supremacy. So it makes sense that it's going to be audio led and voice activated. I think that's right.
Yeah. The other thing that I one of the other things I took away from Cannes is, unsurprisingly, sports was everywhere, like at all times. There was tons of athletes going around. I saw DeAndre Jordan bending down to take a selfie with someone. There was Sport Beach. There were sports events all over the place. It's like the last gasp, I feel like, of the old media world. I mean, even like obscure sports like lacrosse are getting investment. We've talked about this, AB, about this golden age of sports. It seems like there's just far too much money being thrown at things like pickleball leagues and whatnot.
Yeah, what's the question?
Well, I mean, my question is, like, what do you see going, like, what is behind basically this obsession with sports?
I think it's one of the content categories where IP still matters. You can basically, depending on the sport, you can tell athletes and teams where and how they can show the content. There's just better defined rules around how content can be shared. Athletes are very marketable partners for endemic and non-endemic brands. And I think what's the other thing that's really catalyzing a lot of the investment is the leagues are relaxing the rules around private equity investment, which completely changes the game. So before, if you wanted to own a baseball team, you had to have cash and pay for it right then. Now they're allowing leverage, they're allowing private equity to own these businesses. So that's going to increase valuations. And I think that, probably powered by like the UFC, is people love to pattern match and say, how do I make the next big thing? Like, how do I, the amount of value created with the UFC, and really on the back of like one media partnership, but most of it is just good content and Dana White just like driving significant engagement, especially during COVID. And so I think people are trying to trace that trend.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of interest in F1-like sports, in quotes.
Exactly.
Sail GP and things where, it's an excuse for rich people to go and spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen it in the $10 billion Lakers deal. I think sports has all the things, right? The media that persists from a value perspective has a component that both drives people to a timeline, right? Like that you have to watch. You never know what's going to happen. There's always drama. B, that people can take little bits of the DNA of that, of their team or of that sport and kind of create fandoms around it. So it's really good for, engagement and sort of tentpole moments. So sport is really the most effective kind of aggregating force in modern media. And then on top of that, we have all these little characters that emerge from sport as little playthings that kids can engage with and adults can engage with. So it really has in the last decade become really the kind of ultimate modern manifestation of monetizable media.
Yeah, I was always very skeptical about women's basketball, but they've managed to add a little bit of a WWE element to it with like rivalries and whatnot. That maybe it does end up sticking.
I mean, the teams sell out in San Francisco. My kids have seats for women's basketball. I don't know what the team is called in San Francisco, but yeah, I mean, the fandom for that. I mean, that's the best part of what's happened lately is that kind of women's sports are getting their due. I love that about it.
That's the great thing about the content. I'm sure the amount of clips shared where Caitlin Clark is getting shoved or pushing somebody is probably like, if you actually looked at the ratio of those clips compared to all other gameplay, I'm sure it's like some crazy ratio, right? And so that's another valuable point about sports is like it's highly clippable, right? So to Troy's point, people need to watch the content within a certain period so that they can talk about it with their friends, which always drives increased value. And then also it's highly clippable. And I think the thing that the Formula One Netflix show showed is that there's a bunch of additional stories and other narrative arcs that can be told within a sport that actually don't require you to watch the full race, right? So the amount of people that love Formula One that have never watched the full race is probably pretty significant. And so you create this whole fandom, and that's why Fanatics did that whole event here in New York like a week or two ago. It's because there's just, it basically directs consumer attention and spending in very significant ways, because if you can drive fandom, then people want to own the jersey or the hat or whatever of that team or that person they like.
Right.
Yeah, Brian, it's what we always talk about. It's participatory. But we should move over to the other news items. I was actually interested in, as a person who sometimes drops the F-bomb at inappropriate times, I would, rack it up to my being Canadian or maybe misspent youth or bad upbringing or whatever. I thought that Trump dropping the F-bomb on the White House lawn was a moment in our world. I don't know if you thought the same.
I mean, I caught it. Yeah, it was a couple of F-bombs. It's the coarsening of the dialogue. Used to not be able to say shit on TV.
This is a big fucking deal, right? What I found interesting about it is I opened up the FT, a relatively conservative British newspaper. Of course, they quoted Trump in all his glory, and they finally didn't bleep out fuck. So I then looked up, to see when we have caught presidents saying that in the past, and really there's not a lot of precedent publicly. Nixon privately, right?
But I mean, there's Joe Biden thing when he told Obama big fucking deal. Yeah.
It's a big fucking deal, but he whispered it.
Yeah.
But Trump stood up and said, like he did it kind of proudly. And I saw it as a moment when he says they don't know what they're fucking doing, or what the fuck they're doing, rather, I should get it right, that it was a great populist gesture for all of, his supporters that like to use the word.
Could be. I don't know. I think he's probably overplaying his hand. It's not gonna go over well like with the people in the retirement communities. So good luck with that.
That's interesting. I was just at a retirement community. I didn't hear it a lot.
It's one of my mom's key complaints about Trump. This is his language. So I don't know. Maybe
he's gonna get those folks anyway. I mean,
I do think on the political front, we don't want to get too much into politics, but New York City just had the Democratic primary, and
I gotta hop, guys. Sorry.
All right, AB. Yep. Good to see you.
AB.
Zoran Momdani is going to be the Democratic nominee. He's a Democratic socialist. He ran a classic insurgent campaign, and he took down a political dynasty and the Cuomos. There's so many. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And he's got a lot of rhyming, I think, with both Obama and in some ways, honestly, with Donald Trump too. Came out of nowhere. He's only 33 years old. Very savvy in a different way with his media strategy. Troy, what are your thoughts? I mean, I know you're very in favor of the government running grocery stores, but any sort of thoughts on the media angle?
I mean, we're living in a time where there's these sort of populist breakthroughs.
I can show you some places in Miami if you want, Troy.
Well, I mean, I don't want to talk about my own personal observations about tax rates and such. I will tell you that I'm in London currently, and that they have never seen a bigger exodus of millionaires and billionaires on account of tax changes in the UK for what are called non-domiciled residents, where, you know, if they stay for a certain amount of time, they're going to be subject to 40% inheritance tax in the UK and minimum tax thresholds. And everybody left, right? So it's a perfect time to buy luxury real estate in London if you're interested.
Oh, totally.
And I don't know, I went to my favorite high-end Indian restaurant for dinner 2 nights ago, and it was half full.
Oh, that place in like Fitzrovia? I think I've been. I think you said you liked it.
One of my favorite all-time restaurants is, it's important to say that it's not affiliated with the Tamarind in Tribeca, which is a mediocre Indian restaurant. It's a delicious Indian restaurant in Mayfair called Tamarind.
Yeah, that's the one.
Anyway, so the people are leaving, and it's bad for the city economy. It's bad for lots of people. And maybe over the long arc, we get this kind of kumbaya state where, you know, places like London and New York become these free bus, affordable havens with publicly owned grocery stores. But I doubt it. I think what happens is it just reduces the growth rate in the city. It makes life harder for a lot of people that earn money from providing services to people that have money. And it's not a good thing. But that's not a comment on Zohan's moment. He's an exceptional communicator. And for the first time in a long time, I got a text from my wife today who was euphoric about his, you know, interim kind of victory this morning. And I didn't know what to text back to her, to be honest, because I'm conflicted. But then again, you're into it, man. You're sending out you know, TikToks of him complaining about $10 halal.
Well, no, what I thought was interesting about this is how politicians, this is why this guy's got it. He's got the juice. Like, people can disagree with the whether they want the DMV version of grocery stores and whatnot, or the free buses and the various other things, or globalizing of intifada or whatnot. But he's a really, really good modern communicator, and just being able to communicate, you know, the reasons that, you know, malfunctioning government can actually, you know, impact your day-to-day life, you know, like he did with this halal truck, is, you know, that's next level. That's not like, you know, Andy Cuomo was running the old playbook. And I think we're seeing this across the board, that the old political
right, but he's up against a creepy old man. Okay, like,
he's Italian.
Let's get some
creepy. He's Italian.
He's Italian. Okay. Let's get some real competition, and let's hope that personally, let's hope that
this is good for Eric Adams.
His vision for the city is not manifested.
Speaking of that, just a couple of quick travel notes. I was in Geneva this weekend. Very strange place. Very, very odd. It is like the meeting of the world, but like Geneva itself is, you know, it's a physically nice city. It's surrounded by mountains and it's got the lake, obviously. Terrible food and kind of soulless. It's like a bureaucratic town, really, at the end of the day.
Well, you gotta pick your battles there, Brian. You need to eat the right kind. Like, go for roasty. It's good.
Roasty is the only Swiss cuisine. I'm sorry, any of our Swiss listeners, your cuisine is not like top of my list. The roasty is fine.
No, it's like you don't go to eat in Switzerland, and you don't go to.
I mean, how many fondue places can you go to? So they basically, I think it's because they have so many of these UN bureaucrats there, which is another thing. Like, I don't understand in this more with less era. I think they might want to relocate this to somewhere else, because like I spent like $7 on a Fanta there. So like, I think they might want to go to like Mons in Belgium or somewhere, it doesn't even have to be that far away, but like the prices in Geneva compared to like what you get, are like insane. And they also they constrict the housing supply there. So like everything is just massively expensive. And it's interesting. I think.
And if you do manage to get a house, you can get a mortgage at under 1%.
Oh, that's good.
So basically the money's free. I have a friend building a house in Zurich, and
well, Zurich's a real
if you're
city.
taking,
I don't think Geneva is like a real city.
I like Zurich. I think it's nice.
One other travel note, European cities simply do parks way better than American cities. Like every European city that I go to, the parks are amazing. I was over in Place des Vosges. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, here in Paris, near the Marais, and just an amazing like urban park. And there's like dozens, if not hundreds of these, like all over the place. And for some reason, maybe the new mayor, maybe if he becomes mayor, he can like improve the park situation. Because outside of Central Park, New York City doesn't have that many great parks, to be honest with you. Not compared to Europe. There are like great parks here, and people hang out. And there's not all these.
What are you talking about, man? Prospect Park is one of the great parks.
Yeah, it's the Central
world.
Park of I'm talking about little.
And Central Park is a great park.
I'm talking about little
Madison
urban.
Square Park is a nice park.
Little urban parks, not like, just like these main attractions. You're in London right now. There's tons of these little teeny parks that are way better. Like, the other observation I have is, it's an ongoing debate. I see it our food is toxic in America. Let's just stop with denial. It's not about walking more in Europe. I walk all the time in New York City. It's not any of that stuff. You come and you eat. I ate strawberries in Italy. It doesn't taste anything like. It's a completely different food than you get served in the United States with strawberries. No digestive issues here. I think, I might disagree with RFK Jr. with the vaccines, but seriously, tear down the food system because it's making us sick. Like, you cannot go to Europe and eat food.
Can I ask you a question about that? Because I sometimes get into arguments because I can be selectively cheap, I guess is what I would call it. But like my wife she bought $19 strawberries the other day. I was like, what the fuck? Come on, stop it. And they were delicious. $19? And she only ever buys, if there's 2 sets of blueberries, normal for $6.99 and organic for $9.99, she'll only buy the $9.99 ones. Do you do the same?
No, I don't. But to me, it's not like a money thing. And I might even consider it from time to time. But to me, it's just like we just have like a poor like food system. Like if you go and get butter at like a restaurant, like it tastes completely different. Like I don't care what restaurant you're going to in the United States, like the butter is not going to taste anything like just like a regular place like in Europe. Like there's a lot of things that from the plumbing to the elevators that Europeans do not, to the Wi-Fi, that Europeans do not do nearly as well. Food and parks, let's take some notes from them. That's all I'm saying. That's all I want.
All right.
One other note, I'm in Paris right now on my little global tour, leaving tomorrow. I happened upon the Pompidou Center. It's, these fashion weeks
still
are like
under
every week.
Right?
And it turns out there's over 100 fashion weeks during the year, which is kind of funny. Because I flew into Milan and I didn't stay there because there was a fashion week there that was driving up the prices of everything. And I came to Paris and now there's another fashion week, but Paris is bigger, so I guess it can absorb it. But it was the Louis Vuitton men's show. And what was interesting to me, Pharrell is doing that now. And so it's like all like celebrities, but there's an entire ecosystem of influencers now that hang around outside of the fashion show. They're literally outside of it, but they're dressed. There was this guy walking around. He looked like he was in an Ewok costume, but he was just very fashionable. And there's all these photographers taking photos of the people outside. And my wife was explaining to me that this is all part of this sort of hype marketing ecosystem, that all these influencers get their photographs taken and then they end up promoting different brands, and the brands then end up like sending them these clothes to wear and to get photographed and all this. And it's like, it's just this traveling circus that exists in the fashion industry. It's fascinating to me. Fascinating.
That is
This guy was dressed like an Ewok.
Well, given that we're suffering from European Wi-Fi issues, why don't we get to some notes around good products that we're encountering as we travel?
Yeah, let's get to good product. Do you have one, Troy? I have a nomination, but go on.
Well, for me, it's largely around food, usually, because I had a meat pie last night at the Holborn, and I mean, is there anything better than a meat pie
I mean,
with gravy on it?
there are things better
And
than
then
meat
just
pies.
to build on well, I like a meat pie, but that's not what good product is. I always do the build up here. So on the Swiss tip, by the way, a friend of mine came from Switzerland and met me in London and brought me a box of Lauterbach, like chocolate bar of different flavors, which is I've decided my favorite chocolate treat in the world.
All right, so they do
So that's
chocolate.
another
That's
thing
true.
you might consider. They do chocolate really well.
And watches.
But you know, I also had two other little dimensions before I get to the finale. I don't have a lot of sleeping aids, and when I come to the UK, I never sleep. So a friend gave me a Xanax. I don't do Xanax, but they're great.
Oh yeah, yeah, they're great. They'll knock you out.
I mean,
Don't take a full one. Take like a half.
I took a full one last night. I had a great sleep. So good product in Xanax. I don't want to become dependent on them, but
No, I took one like
great.
not, and it was too good. I was like, I got to stay away from this. I'm back on melatonin.
Yeah, the other thing, while I was eating the meat pie, Brian, they handed me a Financial Times and another London newspaper that I tried reading at the table, and I put it down and went back to my phone. Whereupon I read a stat that 83% of Americans have not paid for news in the past year, which surprised me. Big number. I don't know if that surprises you, but basically most people just don't pay for news anymore.
Oh, I don't. That doesn't surprise me. It's a niche behavior.
83%. Speaking of the 1% leaving London, I had a friend, fortunately, who is a flying hobbyist, and he has a helicopter in London. So we took his helicopter down the Thames and then flew out to the Isle of Wight for lunch. That was a good product. That was great.
Helicopter. I wouldn't want to get in a helicopter. I've never been in a helicopter. It's like
I
you
was nervous,
regularly
and
hear
I took
them
the
going
stick
down.
from him.
You regularly
took the
hear
stick.
about them going down. It's like, I'm not saying it's the same as like, I think actually Neil Vogel told me this. He's like, oh, he goes, never get on a motorcycle, never go in a helicopter, and don't smoke. And you're pretty much guaranteed, unless like you get taken out by some random cancer, to like get to like the end.
Good advice, Neil. He went 60 feet above the water. I thought for sure we were going down. I don't like going too close to the ground in a helicopter.
Mine was actually train travel. I like taking a train in Europe. I don't like it in the United States, but I took the train from Geneva to Paris. Completely civilized. It was very nice. Oh, final thing. Another good product is I'm staying right next door to the new Monocle store in Paris. And Monocle is a brand that's very easy to lampoon, and I have done it myself, let's be honest, like repeatedly. At the same time, I really admire how they go and they take retail seriously, that they don't just do the same licensing that everyone does, just total cash grab, go into the Economist store, go into the Wall Street Journal store at Newark Airport, it's the same neck pillows and stuff. This Monocle Cafe is completely their brand. Like even the fonts on the menu are Monocle. And then when you sit down at the table, there was a sign that said you can't use a laptop. And like that is like such like a Tyler Brûlé like thing, because he always rails against, he has all these very strange causes that he takes up, like people using laptops in cafes. It really hurt my newsletter, but
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that we're in a new era where media brands will find new uses as, you know, intellectual property or interfaces to lots of other services. The key thing is that when you do it, you have to do it right. And, you know, he's in the business of creating retail experiences, and that's what they do with like, you know, pride and real kind of expertise and depth. And that's what's cool about that.
exactly.
That's it for this episode of People versus Algorithms, where each week we uncover patterns shaping media, culture, and technology. Big thanks, as always, to our producer, Vanya Arsenov. She always makes us a little clearer and more understandable, and we appreciate her very, very much. If you're enjoying these conversations, we'd love for you to leave us a review. It helps us get the word out and keeps our community growing. Remember, you can find People versus Algorithms on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and now on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.
All right, Troy, let's leave it there. I got to go find this Ewok guy.
Okay, see you.
All right, see you.